Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I request that you be seated, please? The opening session is about to commence. The opening session is about to commence. Please be seated. Your Excellencies, Honourable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a big warm welcome to this special session of the Vienna Energy Forum for 2018. The theme for this year is a very special theme. It's powering prosperity through innovation and for innovation. It works both ways, powering prosperity for innovation and through innovation. And that is what's going to power us through our discussions today. We're looking to see how energy can deliver innovative solutions for economic and social prosperity while preserving and safeguarding our precious planet. Are we ready to get going? Let me introduce you for the welcoming remarks to one of the hosts of the VEF 2018 special session, one of the co-organizers. I have the honor of introducing to you the Director General of UNIDO, Mr. Li Yong, for the welcoming remarks. Mr. Li.
Honourable Minister, Ms. Karen Knazel, I hope my pronunciation is correct. Also Honourable Maria Shetodova, and also the Minister Liu Zhengming, the Under-Secretary General of UN, in charge of UN DESA, Honourable Ministers, colleagues, friends, good morning. On behalf of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization and a co-organizer of the Vienna Energy Forum, I wish to extend a warm and a heartfelt welcome to all the participants gathered here today. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor and a special privilege for me to address and welcome all the participants for the Vienna Energy Forum 2018 special session. Today's special session has been co-organized by UNIDO in partnership with UN DESA, together with the assistance of the government of Austria and the International Institute for Applied System Analysis, IESec, and a Sustainable Energy for All, and Austrian Energy Agency. I just would like to take this opportunity to express my warmest appreciation to all the partners and the sponsors for their long-standing cooperation and the strong support in making this important event happen now for the sixth time. This is the sixth time of the Vienna Energy Forum. This year's special session is taking place against backdrop of the global review of the Sustainable Development Goal 7, affordable and clean energy. It is our hope that to capture today's discussion and enrich by your experience and the best practices and the expertise. In the VEF outcome document, we will try to incorporate all the experience, best practices contributed by you, which will be presented as input to the SDG 7 review. Particularly the ministerial segment of the high-level political forum held at the UN headquarters that will take place in July this year. Beyond the SDG review process, the topics that will be under discussion here today lie at the heart of the broader need to transform and shape both the energy market as well as economic development pathways towards a sustainable, inclusive future. Climate change, stress on the natural resources, as well as the geopolitical factors, are only some of the many factors reshaping today's energy industry. However, while many challenges exist, there are also many opportunities being driven by the factors such as technological change, business model innovation, and the participation of the new actors with traditional energy markets and infrastructure. Colleagues, friends, today we could see industry as a key stakeholder in this endeavor. As the industrial sector firstly presents significant opportunities to realize large and highly cost-effective energy savings and the greenhouse gas emission reductions. Secondly, by factoring sustainable energy transition, the opportunity exists to create new industries, new green jobs, new economic opportunities for international community. That is why in UNIDO, in this organization, we believe that the transition to a clean energy future goes hand in hand with the inclusive and sustainable industrial development. The topics that we will therefore discuss today centers on how we in the development community, along with our national and international partners from the private public sector, can further leverage the opportunities that I have briefly mentioned. And this is imperative. The international community must seek to broaden the benefits, engagement, inclusion of the developing countries and their enterprises and entrepreneurs in the clean energy transition, both at the global and national level. And Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very, very confident that this special session of the Vienna Energy Forum will generate ideas and discussion, and especially will contribute to SDG Goal 7 implementation. And that will contribute to the driving this imperative matter forward, as well as expanding on the connection between SDG 7 and SDG 9. SDG 9 brings the Sustainable Development Goals that encompasses industry, innovation, infrastructure, as we know. Furthermore, by convening here the Vienna Energy Forum 2018, we also have an opportunity to initiate and strengthen the partnerships, which is of the central importance in moving our mutual global energy agenda forward. I look forward to the rich discussions as we always had in the past VEF forum, and that we'll have today also. And UNIDO counts on your participation and your sharing of best practices happened in your organization and in your agency in the private company as well. Your contribution to this forum is highly valued, and I believe will be truly impactful in our endeavor to support member countries and the international community towards the achievement of the 2030 development agenda, and also in particular once again, I would like to mention SDG 7 and SDG 9. So looking forward to the fruitful results of this special session of VEF. Thank you once again for your contribution and participation for this special session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director General Lee. I'd now like to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Karen Kneissl, the Federal Minister for Europe, for Integration and Foreign Affairs from Austria, to share her thoughts.
Yes, also a very warm welcome from my side. Good morning, sabah al-khair, muy buenos dias to each and everybody of you. Dear Director General Lee, dear President Shatatova, dear Under-Secretary General Shenmin, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you to what is already the 6th Vienna Energy Forum, and this year marks the 10th anniversary since the founding of this forum back in 2008. Over the past 10 years, the Vienna Energy Forum has managed to establish itself as the leading international platform for discussing the realization of tangible results to sustainable development challenges. The Vienna Energy Forum would not be held regularly if it were not supported by a number of partners who work alongside UNIDO to make this forum a success. Sustainable Energy for All, the Austrian Development Agency, IASA, located in Luxembourg, and also the Global Forum for Sustainable Energy, known as GFSE, which was founded and is managed by our Ambassador Irene Gina Reichel. Thank you. Having discussed different topics over the years, we will today once more focus on Sustainable Development Goals 7 itself and the assurance of access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all. On what has been accomplished and especially on what still needs to be done over the next 12 years in order to reach the goal by 2030. I believe that the roundtables will pay attention to the different goals that are connected to the sustainable energy agenda, such as health, gender equality, climate, infrastructure, industrialization and agriculture, showing once more how broad this topic is. In light of the high-level political forum to be held in New York in July, which will, among other goals, review the SDG 7, what we work on here today gains particular importance as it will contribute substantially to the HLPF. Excellencies, I am delighted that this forum has firmly established itself in Vienna, thereby creating a mutually beneficial partnership between the forum and the city. While the forum gains momentum from Vienna's status as host to many international organizations and as an energy hub, the city in turn attracts attention through the forum as a place where sustainability and green living matter, emphasizing Vienna's role as a center of worldwide energy dialogue. This is, for example, also reflected in our EU presidency in the second half of this year. It will be highlighted by a sustainable energy event for the promotion of the global network of regional sustainable energy centers, which Austria has established together with UNIDO over the recent years. In this context, I have the particular pleasure to announce an additional financial contribution by the Austrian Development Agency for the preparatory phase of ECO, a Clean Energy Center. With this center, the global network of regional sustainable energy centers will expand to Central Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, as some of you might know, I've been analyzing the topic energy for many years. I would venture to say that what usually comes to my mind when talking about energy in a global context is still not primarily sustainability, but rather the geopolitical implications of oil and gas. And I see here some of those I met beforehand, such as Scott Foster and many others of you with whom I had the pleasure to work beforehand, whether it was in Central Asia or in the Middle East. Yet the importance of SDG 7 and the wide-ranging consequences that follow where its implementation lacks are becoming more and more visible to a broader public. Without doubt, we still have a certain road before us, and we have to move faster, as we all know. Luckily enough, this forum provides a perfect platform to help us speed up the process. Let me thank all those who have organized behind the screens in front today for the continuous and tireless effort to support for making this forum once more a success story, both in content and organization. I wish all of you a constructive 6th Vienna Energy Forum, and may each and everyone among us try to keep his and her individual footprint as low as possible for today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Federal Minister. Now for something a little bit different, I'm going to invite Mr. Abdulrahman Ayman Ibrahim, Global President of Aiesec, to deliver key remarks before a short video message from Aiesec is played.
A little bit different, because that's usually how we're viewed a lot of times as young people. So, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I will keep it a little bit different, because my name or what I do doesn't really matter, but those whom I represent is what matters the most. I represent a network of young people that more than 1 million of them have been through an experience with the organization that I belong to in the past 70 years. A lot of those young people endeavor with Aiesec with a passion and an ambition and a naive thought that they can make the world a better place. 33,000 young people per year are mobilized towards the Sustainable Development Goals through Aiesec. Specifically, SDGs related to energy, like SDG 7 and SDG 9. But still, regardless of all that effort throughout the past 70 years, we have been facing, for the past specific 627 months, some of the hottest climate that this world has ever seen. More than 22.5 million people have been displaced due to climate-related disasters. It's a global challenge, and a global challenge requires a global solution. And we as young people believe that on the grassroots, through a lot of innovative solutions, through social entrepreneurship, we can be a very big part and a very big player as part of that change. But unfortunately, a lot of times, we're viewed as a thematic area, or a project, or as part of an agenda. Although, if mobilized, young people can be a very powerful growth engine for societies, for economies, and truly contribute towards making this world a better place. Because if you think of a lot of the problems that we're facing, a lot of their solutions need to happen on the grassroots, through off-the-grid solutions, through things like blockchain, through technology. But although sometimes we're judged that this is the size of our attention span, it's the size of a smartphone, or what we see on social media, still in this exact same small piece of device, through technology, we can make this world a better place. So I call upon young people to step up. I call upon young people to present their solutions, to not shy away, to not just hide and believe that, yeah, we're just going to do our work and it's going to be fine. We need to advocate. And we need to make the world know about the work that we're doing, because that matters. Because at the end of the day, we say that young people are the future. But what future is going to be there if we keep consuming our planet with this same rate? Because there's no planet B. Because I've been speaking for exactly 1 minute. In this past 1 minute, we as humankind have consumed more than 1 million bottles of plastic. Why? In this past 1 minute, we have consumed what is equivalent to 48 football fields worth of forestry around the world. Why? This is my big question that I'm posing. But with that big question, I also pose a call to action to young people. If you want to have a future, if you want to be the generation of the future, you're going to need to act now. And you're going to need to work for today, so there would be a tomorrow. I hope I kept it crisp. I hope I kept it to the point and with clear call to action. And I think in this upcoming video comes a better remark on my behalf and on behalf of those young people. just like it shows in the video, the clock is ticking. And I gave a small example of what 1 minute can mean for us as humankind. So in that 1 minute, that is our call to action for young people. And we believe that with our energy, dynamism, and willingness to bring about change, we can be the solution. So partner with us, and let's work on it hand in hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abdul. I should say, give you your whole name with a short name. Abdul Rahman. We're friends, aren't we? Okay, so we're all awake now, aren't we, after that little video and that wake-up call? Where are we going next? Well, I think we shall introduce the President of the UN Economic and Social Council, of course, Her Excellency Ms. Maria Chatardova, for her keynote.
Mr. Director General, Madam Minister, Mr. Under Secretary General, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to be here in Vienna today to Vienna Energy Forum and to address this distinguished audience at the opening session. I would like to start by thanking the UN Industrial Development Organization, the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, Austrian Development Cooperation, Sustainable Energy for All, the Austrian Development Agency, and the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs for co-organizing this forum. I would also like to thank the municipal government of Vienna for its warm hospitality and generosity. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is the most ambitious global agenda ever. It is our blueprint for peace, prosperity, dignity, and opportunity for all on a healthy planet. As the representative of young people said, we have no plan B for our planet. The 2030 Agenda captures almost every aspect of sustainable development to expand dignity and opportunity for all, from ensuring eradication of poverty, adequate food, clean water, better education, gender inequalities, to combating climate change. To realize this vision, reliable and affordable energy supply is an essential prerequisite. That is why the 2030 Agenda included a dedicated goal on energy, Sustainable Development Goal 7, to ensure access to sustainable and modern energy for all by 2030. This requires expanding access to electricity and clean cooking fuels and technologies, as well as increasing the share of renewable energy and improving energy efficiency. At this moment, however, progress in all these areas falls short of what is needed to achieve SDG 7 by 2030. About 1 billion people currently live without the benefits of electricity. Close to 3 billion people still lack access to clean and safe cooking fuels and technologies. Progress on energy efficiency is not sufficient to meet the target. Although modern renewable power is rising rapidly, far more needs to be done in transport, building, and other applications. Action must be taken immediately to keep our promise. The good news is that there are grounds for optimism. We are witnessing unprecedented advances in technologies, rapid cost declines in renewable energy, and strategic policy shifts, which are accelerating the transformation of energy systems worldwide. Electricity access is swiftly expanding in many parts of Asia and some countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Now is the time to step up, capitalizing on the momentum. We must make clean cooking solutions available for all by raising it to a top political priority. We must aggressively close the electricity access gap by harnessing both on- and off-grid renewable energy solutions. We must accelerate the pace of transition towards renewable energy and more energy-efficient systems in all sectors. We need to double the financing for SDG 7 globally, from the current $500 billion per year to over $1 trillion per year. The needs of those who are the most vulnerable and the farthest behind, including least developed countries, small island developing states, and landlocked developing countries, should be prioritized. We must also enhance international cooperation on capacity building and technology innovation, building on ongoing efforts such as the global network of regional sustainable energy centers supported by the UNIDO. Addressing all of these areas holistically can realize substantial economic, social, and environmental benefits for all. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in July, under the auspices of the UN Economic and Social Council, the High-Level Political Forum will undertake the first global review of SDG 7, with the overall theme, Transformation towards Sustainable and Resilient Societies. I warmly welcome the SDG 7 policy briefs developed by the SDG 7 Technical Advisory Group convened by UNDESA as a valuable input to the SDG 7 review at the HLPF. I believe outcomes from this year's Vienna Energy Forum will also provide important inputs for the High-Level Political Forum and its follow-up action. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, SDG 7 is achievable, but there is no time to waste. Everyone will have to be engaged and accelerate their efforts. I urge all of you to use your own leadership, form partnerships, and scale up action to make SDG 7 and 2030 agenda a reality. Thank you again for your leadership and commitment. Thank the representative of young people for his engagement and for the engagement of his generation. Please accept my best wishes for a successful forum. I thank you very much.
Thank you, President Chatardova. SDG 7 is achievable. Let us have that ringing through our ears all day. Finally, I'd like to welcome UN Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Mr. Lia Jianmin, to deliver his keynote speech.
Your Excellency, Ms. Karin Kneissl, Federal Minister for Austria for Foreign Affairs, Your Excellency, Mr. Li Yuan, Director General of UNIDO, Your Excellency, Ambassador Chatardova, President of UN Aiesec, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to join you on behalf of the UN Secretariat at this year's Vienna Energy Forum. I wish to join the previous speakers in thanking UNIDO and other organizers. I'm delighted that the UNDESA has been invited to support the convening of this forum. Dear colleagues, the issue of energy lies at the heart of both 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. Billions of people stand to benefit from the achievement of SDG 7 on energy, with its targets on universal access to energy, increased energy efficiency, and expanded use of renewable energy. We must not let these targets down. Energy is the key to addressing many of the challenges the world is facing today, whether to eradicate poverty, to ensure access to the basic services such as health, education, clean water, and sanitation, and to empower the youth and the women, and to drive sustainable development and inclusive industrialization, or to combat climate change. Therefore, energy is a cross-cutting issue affecting the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year's SDG 7 review at the High-Level Political Forum presents a critical occasion for taking stock, strengthening our energy-related commitments, and redoubling our efforts to meet SDG 7 targets. That is why DESA, as the Secretariat for the High-Level Political Forum and the Secretariat of UN Energy, has convened a multi-stakeholder technical advisory group to facilitate stakeholder engagement in the review, follow-up, and implementation of SDG 7. The SDG 7 Target Advisory Group functions as an interface between the Secretariat's support for the thematic work of the High-Level Political Forum and technical contributions from both within and outside the UN family. Over the last several months, the group members cooperated to produce 27 policy advice and policy briefs, which explore SDG 7 and its targets, including advancing SDG 7 implementation, strengthening linkages between SDG 7 and other SDGs, regional perspectives and experiences, and building a sustainable and equitable energy future. Over 50 organizations from governments, UN entities, international organizations, civil society, and other stakeholders collaborated in this multi-stakeholder effort, including 21 of them from the UN system. I commend UNIDO for their leadership in supporting the work of this group. One of the group's output is a global agenda for accelerated SDG 7 action. Its fundamental message is unmistakable. We must step up and scale up our efforts. The global agenda presents priority selections for the achievement of SDG 7 targets, including through providing clean cooking solutions for all, closing the electricity access gap, and accelerating transition towards sustainable energy and energy efficiency solutions, doubling global financing for SDG 7, and enhancing innovation and capacity building. It is our expectation that this global agenda, together with the results of the Global SDG 7 conference in Bangkok last February, will help inform intergovernmental discussions at the High-Level Political Forum. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today we have seen inspiring examples of action and commitments from around the world, but we need to double our efforts to realize our collective vision. First, it is critical that the global agenda for accelerated SDG 7 action be translated into concrete, time-bound action plans and partnerships to move its work forward quickly. Second, we need to strengthen progress monitoring for SDG 7. In this regard, we warmly welcome the SDG 7 tracking report, jointly prepared by the SDG 7 indicator custodians for the first time. Third, we must also enhance synergies between the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement on climate change. In this regard, DESA will convene a global symposium to promote synergies between 2030 Agenda and climate action in the fall of this year. We will continue to strengthen the efforts of the SDG 7 Technical Advisory Group and to assist the UN development system in delivering simultaneously on the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. This includes support for the High-Level Political Forum, UNFCCC Conference of the Parties, the Secretary-General's Climate Summit in 2019, and events related to the UN Decade on Sustainable Energy for All, 2014 to 2024. To create the future we want and leave no one behind, we must seize on all those opportunities and take steps forward. We are counting on everyone to work together to make the achievement of SDG 7 a reality. I look forward to the fruitful discussions and outcomes from this forum. I wish the forum a great success. I thank you.
Thank you, Under-Secretary General Leah. I'd now like to invite all the speakers for the high-level roundtable, 1 on promoting the development of SMEs, to proceed to room C6 on the 7th floor, where the roundtable discussion is about to begin, and I wish you well for the rest of the day.
To make your way towards your seats. We will be starting the plenary session shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly take your seats. We will be starting plenary session number 1 very shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly take your seats. We will be starting the plenary session in just a couple of minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you please take your seats? Would you like me to ring the bell? Yes. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to High-Level Panel 1 on Energy System Transformation. My name is Edu Willemse. I'm working at the Energizing Development Program, a multi-donor program, and I'm also an Energy Access Advisor to BMZ and DGIS, and I was asked to moderate this session, which I do with a lot of pleasure. And this session aims to discuss the challenges and opportunities that come with the transformation of energy system and infrastructure. And we aim in this session to address 2 issues, namely, 1, how energy systems create new industries that shape inclusive and sustainable industrial development. And secondly, how energy systems can be of benefit for developing countries to deal with 3 emerging trends in the energy sector: decarbonization, digitization, and decentralization as an enabler for economic growth. And we have asked our panel members to prepare on the following questions. Why do we need to transform the current energy system? Why is this important for the developing countries? What's the role of international organizations in this energy transformation process? What are the types of new technologies that can move forward this transformation? To kickstart the discussion, we have invited a so-called scene setter for this panel, and we are very happy that we have been able to find a thought leader for this job. He is a well-known social and economic theorist. He's the author of many books, among others, The Zero Marginal Cost Society. He's the president of the Foundation on Economic Trends. He has been an advisor to Angela Merkel from Germany, the presidencies of the European Commission, Mr. Barroso, Mr. Juncker, as well as to the government of China. And in an interview, end 2017, in the bulletin Strategy and Business, he mentioned the second internet. this one for renewable energy, a new digital power grid stretching across continents, which allows millions of people to produce their own wind and solar electricity and send their excess power generation back into the system. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to introduce the scene setter of this panel. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Jeremy Rifkin.
Good morning, everybody. Let me start on a bit of a somber note, but I hope it'll end up giving us some time to liberate our thinking. You'll be the judge. GDP is slowing all over the world. It's growing at a slower rate in every single region on the planet, and it has been for a number of years. The reason is productivity has been declining both in the developing and industrial world for nearly 15 years. The result is we are continuing to try to keep GDP up by going further into debt instruments in every country. And unemployment is structurally high. Low productivity, high unemployment. Our economists are projecting 20 more years of low productivity and slow growth. Let me do the numbers for you. After two industrial revolutions in the 19th and 20th century, I think it's fair to make the following evaluation. Half the human race, we are far better off than our ancestors were before we began this industrial way of life. Granted, 40% of the human race, living on $2 a day or less, are only appreciably better off than before we began the industrial age. And I'd have to say that 1 billion plus human beings making less than $1 a day are actually worse off than before we began this modern era. So while half the human race has done well, the other half of the human race a teeny bit better. The very rich among us have done quite well. This morning, the 8 richest people in the world, we could put them in this row. Their accumulated wealth now equals the accumulated wealth of 1/2 the human beings living on this earth. That's 3.5 billion people. There's nothing like this in the history of our species. We're in trouble. There's something really dysfunctional about the way the human race is organizing itself. And now this industrial crisis that we have has given rise to a far more important crisis, an environmental crisis. 2 centuries of digging up the carbon and the carbon of the Carboniferous era. We lived off the assets of a previous geological period in history. We dug up all that carbon. We've spewed massive CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide into the atmosphere. We're in real-time climate change, as you know. And this is what I want to say. No one has ever told why climate change is so dangerous. I'm going to explain it to you. It changes the water cycles of the earth. That's what this is all about, and it's never described. Our ecosystems have developed over millions of years based on the hydrosphere, the water cycles, the clouds that converse the ecosystems. Here's the rub. For every 1 degree, the temperature is going up because of all of these industrial gas emissions. For every 1 degree that temperature is going up, the atmosphere is sucking up 7% more precipitation from the ground because the heat is forcing the precipitation into the clouds, and we're getting more concentrated precipitation in the clouds and wild, out-of-control, unpredictable water events across every ecosystem. Blockbuster winter snows that are supposed to happen once every 1,000 years, new normal. Dramatic spring flooding across every continent. It's supposed to happen every 500,000 years. It's happening every year. Summer droughts and wildfires across every continent. In my country, North America, we've had it across British Columbia to Southern California year after year after year. Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes, 4 of them hitting the Caribbean and the United States southeastern section, these hurricanes are supposed to happen once every 1,000 years. 4 in 1 month. Our ecosystems cannot catch up to the runaway exponential curve in the water cycles, the clouds. They're collapsing in real time. And this is what I want everyone here, if you're a parent or grandparent, to think about. Our scientists tell us we are in the 6th extinction event of life on Earth, and it doesn't even make the headlines. No one knows about it. I was at a famous university the other day. A raise of hands, not a single person knew that this was happening. It's the most dramatic story in human history, and it determines whether we survive. So our scientists are projecting that we are going to lose at present rate of extinction about 50% of all those species of life on Earth in the next 7 to 8 decades. That's the projection, the outer edge. The last time this happened, an extinction event of this magnitude, was 65 million years ago. As my wife says, we are asleep. We're greenwashing. We're putting in pilot projects. We're having nice conferences. We're setting covenant prescriptions at Paris, and we are not moving where we need to go. There's no guarantee that the human race is going to survive this moment in history. So what do? We need a new economic vision for the world. It needs to be compelling. It needs to make sense. We need a game plan to deliver that vision. It has to move as quickly in the developing world as in the highly industrialized world. We have to be off a carbon-based civilization, not low, not clean, off, in less than 35 to 40 years, if we have any opportunity to avoid the abyss, because we will not reverse this. This is going to be here with hundreds of thousands of years. We are in the Anthropocene. It's a new period of history, unpredictable weather. We've been living off pretty nice weather for 10,000 years. It's over. But we have to move to an age of resilience. We have to survive. We have to reflourish. We have to regenerate. And we have to make sure that life continues well into the future on this earth. So, we need to step back and ask this question. How do the great economic paradigm shifts in history occur? If we know how they occur, we're going to get a roadmap here at UNIDO, and for every developing region in the world, and we're going to compass to move quickly into a new period of history. There have been at least 7 major economic paradigm shifts in history. They're very interesting anthropologically. They share a common denominator. At a moment of time, 3 defining technologies emerge across the civilization to create what we call a general-purpose technology platform in engineering, an infrastructure that fundamentally transforms the way a civilization manages, powers, and moves its economic, social, and governing life. What are those 3 technology revolutions? Number 1, new communication technologies to more efficiently manage the economic, social, and political activity. That's fairly obvious. Number 2, new sources of energy to more efficiently power the economic, social, and governing life. Obvious. And number 3, new modes of mobility, transportation, logistics to more efficiently move the economic, social, and governing life. When communication revolutions converge with new energy regimes and new modes of mobility and logistics, it does fundamentally change the way we manage power and move society. Common sense. It changes our temporal spatial orientation. It changes our business models. It changes our governance, fundamentally. 2 quick examples. First Industrial Revolution, 19th century Britain. Second Industrial Revolution, 20th century the U.S. The Brits take us into that first Industrial Revolution with a communication, energy, and mobility convergence. The Brits invent steam-powered printing, no more manual print presses. Big leap forward in communication. Cheap, quick print, textbooks, literacy, public schools, newspapers. It was a big leap forward in communication. Then the Brits lay out a telegraph system in the last half of that 19th century. Steam-powered printing, the telegraph, converged with a new source of energy in Britain, cheap coal, harvested by the steam engine, a British invention. Then the British put the steam engine on rails, locomotives, national transport, mobility, logistics, communication, energy, mobility, manage power, and move economic life. 20th century, the United States, another convergence of communication, energy, and mobility to manage power and move society, centralized electricity, the telephone. I know we think the internet's a big deal, but oh my God, the telephone was the big deal. Try to imagine out of nowhere, for the first time in all of human history, everybody communicating at the speed of light. Later, radio and television. These communication technologies in the United States converge with a new source of energy, cheap Texas oil. Then Henry Ford put everybody on the road, cars, buses, and trucks, internal combustion engines, road, rail, water, and air. Second Industrial Revolution takes the whole world through the 20th century. It peaks in July 2008. Remember that month? Brent crude oil hits 147 a barrel. The whole economy shuts down. That was the economic earthquake. The collapse of the financial market 60 days later, which we're all spending our time on, that's the aftershock. You can't keep the debt and credit society moving when the real economy shut down, and the real economy relies on fossil fuels. Fertilizers, pesticides, construction materials, pharmaceutical products, synthetic fiber, power, transport, heat, light, all of it. So when oil starts to go over 75 a barrel, you watch all the other prices go up. At 100 a barrel, you watch purchasing power slow. We are in a growth shutdown era. Oil prices are gyrating wildly. So when the economy goes down, oil prices go down to 40 or 50. When the economy starts to rev up again, they go up to 80, 90, 100. Then the oil industry is fighting with the shale gas, tar sand industry, and they're taking the oil price up and down to destroy their competitors, and it is an end game. And where we have oil, we have a lot of failed states. Does anybody in this room here at UNIDO today believe that we are in the sunrise of the fossil fuel era? Where do we go from here? So let me share a little anecdote. When Chancellor Merkel became Chancellor of Germany, she asked me to come to Berlin in the first couple of weeks of her new government to help her address the question of how to grow the German economy and grow some jobs on her watch. The first question I asked the new Chancellor when I got to Berlin, I said, Madam Chancellor, how do you grow the German economy and create jobs when your businesses are plugged in to a second industrial revolution infrastructure of centralized telecommunication, fossil fuel nuclear power, internal combustion transport, and that infrastructure peaked in its productivity over a decade ago? This is the key. Because economists say, well, we have all these killer new products. Why is productivity declining? It's infrastructure, and infrastructure creates the new productivities. You live off that infrastructure. You plug into it. That's the great paradigm shifts in history. That's what we're missing. So I said to the Chancellor, you can have market reforms and labor reforms and fiscal reforms. You can stimulate 1 million Steve Jobs. It's not going to make any difference as long as those businesses are plugged into that second industrial revolution infrastructure of centralized telecommunication, fossil fuel nuclear power, internal combustion transport. The productivity peaked over 10 or 15 years ago, led by Japan, the US, and Germany. From 14 to 20% aggregate efficiency. Remember, better machines and better workers is only 14% of productivity. The big factor is aggregate efficiency, the ratio of potential work to useful work in every conversion across your value chain. It peaked in all the industrial countries. So on that first day, we discussed a third industrial revolution, a new convergence of communication, energy, and mobility to manage power and move Germany. At the end of the day, the Chancellor said, Mr. Rifkin, we will have this third industrial revolution. Let me describe it, and let me start by saying this revolution that I'm going to describe to you is going to move more quickly in the developing world. And I know that's hard to imagine. This is a very technical revolution, but it's a completely distributed one. And what I'm going to say to you this morning is that the developing world's liability has now become its asset. The liability in the developing world is you had no infrastructure. You lost out on the first industrial revolution. You were occupied, colonized. You lost out on the second industrial revolution. While you were nationalized, you came in and you were getting the spoils, and mainly your resources were used for the fossil fuel culture. But in this third industrial revolution, your liability is your asset because you don't have any infrastructure. That's an asset. because it's going to be quicker to leapfrog in and build new infrastructure from scratch and new regulations to manage it than it's going to be for the developed countries to take the old second industrial revolution infrastructure, transform it, have to actually retire those stranded assets, and begin to create new regulations. So let me lay this out. A new communication, energy, mobility infrastructure. We all have our smartphones this morning. World Wide Web's been here 25 years. We're moving to 5G, big data, communication, broadband. It's all here. It's been a revolution. Now this digital communication revolution, it's all digital. First industrial revolution was steam power. The second was analog electricity. The third is digital. There is no fourth. There may be marketing hype. Does not exist. It's digital. So the digital communication internet is now converging with a digitalized renewable energy internet. Already, this is not theory. So that millions of people already, and soon hundreds of millions, and I will tell you within 25 years, everyone, will be producing their own solar, wind, and other, some biomass, but mainly solar and wind energy where they live, where they work, share it off-grid, or send it back to a digitalized renewable energy internet, which is already emerging in many countries, just like we share information, news, and knowledge on the communication internet. And now those two internets are converging with a third internet, a digitalized mobility, transportation, logistics internet made up of autonomous transport, nobody in the vehicles within 5 years. First road, then rail, then inland water, then air. Those vehicles will be electric and fuel cell. We're outlawing the internal combustion engine in countries around the world by 2030 and 40 already. And those vehicles will be operating in smart systems along with drones. That is coming in the next 5 years, not 20. These three internets, digital communication, energy, mobility internet, to manage power and move every society right on top of a platform called the Internet of Things. We are laying out sensors across our built environment and the natural world to give us data. Sensors in the agricultural fields, and smart factories, and smart homes, and smart businesses, and smart warehouses, and smart roads. Ubiquitous interconnectivity by 2030. This is an external brain and nervous system that can connect the human race in real time, in all of our diversity. On the upside, it's a potential great leap forward for humanity. We can now democratize economic life, and we can move to a new form of globalization, which is now emerging. Globalization in the 20th century was based on a second industrial revolution infrastructure that was centralized, top-down, proprietary with intellectual property, and it vertically integrated in order to create economies of scale. That's the only way it would work. But the third industrial revolution infrastructure is designed to be distributed, not centralized. It works best if it's open and transparent, because you get the network effect. If you try to monopolize it, you lose the productivity. And it scales laterally, region to region, like Wi-Fi. If you try to manipulate it, you lose it. So, the Internet of Things, we're going to connect all the buildings. Every building needs to be retrofitted. We're starting it in parts of Europe, so they're efficient. Then we turn them into distributed data centers, so not all the data is at Google and Alibaba. It's going to be distributed across the buildings. And every building is going to be a micro power generation region to generate local energy. And there are going to be charging stations to both charge the vehicles and provide storage for the grid. While the upside is very alluring, there's also the dark side, the dark net. And this is just as impressive as the bright net. We can connect the whole human race, and we're going to move to globalization. That is clear. We don't need centralized globalization with a handful of big companies actually being the intermediaries so the wealth moves to the top. We are already in globalization, where communities and regions that lay out this infrastructure are going to be able to move virtually and physically and interact anywhere in the world at any time with each other at almost zero marginal cost. We are moving to a globalized, lateralized world where regions and communities become much more important players. The downside is, how do we protect network neutrality? Excuse me, you're going to have to take the camera in the back. Thanks. How do we protect network neutrality in this age? How do we ensure that governments don't purloin this for political purposes and intervene in other governments' elections? How do we ensure Google and Facebook and Alibaba don't take this over, commodify each of us and all of our life experiences, data they use, in order to tell us what we want, and algorithm governance destroys our personal agency? How do we protect security? How do we protect privacy? How do we ensure against malware, cybercrime, and climate events and cyber terrorism taking down the system? The more distributed the system, the less vulnerable to attack. What is resilience? It means building out this infrastructure that is so distributed that if there's a climate event of major magnitude, if there's a terrorist attack, we're so distributed you can go off-grid, you can re-aggregate, you can decentralize, you can go back on. Had Puerto Rico had this infrastructure, they'd have been up the next morning. The next morning. So, we're going to have to spend a lot of time on resilience, but here's the benefit for the system. You can go up on this Internet of Things that's already emerging system and take the data you care about that's streaming through the society and strip it out. If you're a small business, a cooperative, developing world, strip out the data you care about that's flowing through the system. Then apply your own analytics to that big data. Create your own apps. So you can dramatically increase your aggregate efficiency at every stage of conversion across your value chain. So you increase your productivity, reduce your ecological footprint, and plunge your marginal cost. Already, we're seeing the marginal cost is really getting low because we've seen what's happened in the communication internet. We've got 3 billion people who are now in the sharing economy. Part of it's in the capitalist economy, but part of it's not. We've got 3 billion people sharing music and YouTube videos and massive open online college courses, and they are contributing to Wikipedia and democratizing the knowledge of the world. It's all free. All you need is a service provider. That is a revolution, and a lot of industries have been affected. Music, television, newspapers. But new businesses have emerged, not just Google, Facebook, Twitter. Thousands of companies and cooperatives and nonprofits are creating the data, the platform, the apps. Well, we thought there'd be a firewall here, and while zero marginal cost would create a sharing society, we didn't think that the firewall would be broken into the physical world. We thought this is just about information, news, and entertainment. The firewall's broken. Zero marginal cost, the Internet of Things. Let's go back and look now at energy. What's happened in Germany since that first conversation, and now we're now in northern France. We're doing the plan for 23 cities in the Netherlands. We're in Luxembourg. We can tell you what's happening in real time on the ground. In Germany, 35% of the electricity today is solar and wind. It's going to be 100% before 2040. And what's interesting about it is the fixed cost of this energy. It's on an exponential curve like computer chips. When I was a kid, there were no computers. The chairman of IBM, when the first computer came on, said, we'll need 5 computers for the world. That was a very optimistic forecast. They cost millions of dollars. But then Intel engineers began to double the capacity on those chips every 2 years. Now China, smartphone, $25, with more computing power than sent our astronauts to the moon. So whatever village you're in the Amazon, you've got people there with more computing power connected than sent our astronauts to outer space. That's the revolution. So the fixed cost in solar and wind are an exponential curve. It used to cost $78, $78, 1 solar watt fixed cost in 1970s. You know what it is this morning? It's not $78 fixed cost. It's 45 cents. It's 35 cents in 18 months from now. We now have, and I want everyone in the developing world to hear this, we now have power and utility companies in Europe and the United States, some of them affiliating with our global consortium. Right now, they have purchased long-term 20-year contracts right now in the last year for solar and wind at 5 cents, 4 cents, 3 cents, and now 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And here's what you're not being told. I meet with CEOs in the power and utility companies every month, all over the world. Panic in the boardrooms. Because what's happened to them is what happened to the music industry, newspapers, book publishing, when digitalization hit the communication internet, now energy. And here's the story. Citibank 2 years ago, and I want everyone here that's in fossil fuels to listen to me carefully so you can't say you didn't know. Everybody here that's still in oil and natural gas and coal, listen to this. Citibank 2 years ago issues a report. Citibank, we have $100 trillion right now in stranded assets in the fossil fuel industry. It's the biggest bubble in history. It's the carbon bubble, the platforms, the drilling, the exploration, the oil that will never come out of the ground. Carney, the president of the Bank of England, 2 months ago met with Lloyds of London. Front page Financial Times, he said, we've got stranded assets in fossil fuels. This is the elephant in the room. So no excuses. If you want to stay in oil, stay in gas, you need to understand you are now deeper into debt. And the developing world is going to pay the ultimate price, not only victimized for your resources over this period, but now more oil going to you in the last stages, and you're going to be responsible for retiring that bubble. So what's interesting in Europe is once you pay the fixed cost, the marginal cost of this energy, near zero. The sun has not sent us a bill in Germany. The wind has not invoiced us anywhere in Europe. It's free. What happens when German businesses plug into a third industrial revolution infrastructure of distributed communication, managing distributed energy on the energy internet, and those businesses have solar and wind electricity at near zero marginal cost to manage every single conversion across their supply and value chain? How does the second industrial revolution steeped in fossil fuels and centralized telecommunication and transport compete with that? This is in real time. This is in real time. Who's producing all the new energy? We have 4 major power companies in Germany. EnBW, I worked with Yves Clausen, their CEO, for a couple of years. RWE, E.ON, and Vattenfall, we thought they were invincible 10 years ago. And what happened to him is what happened to the music industry, television, newspapers, book publishing. All sorts of small players came together across Germany. Farmers, small businesses, neighborhoods, and they created cooperatives, electricity cooperatives. They all got loans from the banks. The banks knew they'd pay back by the energy generator, and now we don't even need the tariffs. Get rid of them. We don't need them. We can compete. Nobody defaulted on the loans. So 96% of all the new energy for the 21st century in Germany is being powered by small players. This is power to the people. This is power to the people, literally and figuratively. This moves us from geopolitics to more of a biosphere frame of reference. Does this mean this is the end of the energy companies? No, but they have to change their business model, especially power and utilities. So a number of years ago, E.ON asked if I would debate their chairman, Mr. Tyson. He's still there, and here's what I said to him. You're not leaving the second industrial revolution tomorrow, but it's obviously a stranded asset. So you have to be in 2 portfolios. The disruption's immediate. If you lose the next 4 years, you're gone. But the transition's 20 years. So you have to retire out your legacy companies, keep them moving. You don't want them to collapse. But you have to move to a new business model for a third industrial revolution infrastructure. And here's the new model. You don't generate any of your power. We're all generating it where we live, where we work. And you will make more money by selling less and less electricity. And he said, wait a minute. We're not creating the power, and we're selling less electricity. How do we make money? And I said, you will set up partnerships with thousands and thousands of businesses, and you will help manage the energy flowing through the energy internet through those businesses' value chains, through their supply chains. You'll help them, because that's your expertise. And then all of that productivity that they gain from managing that energy moving through their supply chains and their business chains, they're going to share some of that productivity gain back with the utility company in performance contracts. He said no. 5 years ago, he said yes last year. He waited too long. He's put his fossil fuel and nuclear on the market. Anybody here want to buy it? And he's moving to energy services. So is EnBW and RWE and Vattenfall and EDF and ERDF have joined us in France. As I said, we're doing all of Northern Industrial France deployment. And these are working people. This isn't a rich region. It's the old industrial region. And ERDF, Poglio called. He said, I'm with you on the ground. They're not leaving nuclear tomorrow, but they understand what's happening here. You've got to have a transition strategy in place now. Not a pilot, a scale-up. It's not just Europe, now China. I really had never been to China. I'd never been to China, and I was quite surprised when President Xi and Premier Li came in. And Premier Li published his formal biography. They both did. And he said he had read my book, The Third Industrial Revolution, which was a shocker to me. I'd never been there. And he instructed the central government of China to immediately move on the narrative I'm laying out to you today. And do they move fast? I've been moving with the leadership on formal visits ever since. But let me show you how fast China moves. 11 weeks after my first visit, the state grid, which is the biggest electricity grid in the world, announced $82 billion in the new 5-year plan, $82 billion, to completely digitalize the state grid, so it's an energy internet, so that millions of Chinese people in their local neighborhoods could buy solar and wind from their own companies, because now they're big producers and they need a domestic market. And then they can use it off-grid or sell what they don't need back to an energy internet across China, and with the Belt Road, perhaps across Eurasia with other countries, if we come into the game. Watch the EU, watch China. The coming together of these two internets, communication, energy internet, makes possible the mobility internet, and it's all about energy. Without energy, you can't do the communications. Without energy, you can't do the mobility. Energy is the centerpiece, but this is the story. We built the whole second industrial revolution around building and selling automobiles. Shopping malls, suburbs, travel and tourism. It's all about automobiles. Here's the problem. Do we have any millennials under the age of 37 here? Would you raise your hands? Is there anyone under 37 in this room? Okay, you have thrown us a curve. Unfortunately, you actually don't want to own automobiles. Millennials want access to mobility and car-sharing services in the sharing economy. They don't want to own automobiles in a market that's grandma and grandpa. And the car companies know that from now on, that's the case. Here's the problem. For every car shared, we are eliminating 15 cars. The auto industry knows this. So, the number 3 cause of climate change is transport. We're going to eliminate, of 1 billion vehicles, we're going to eliminate 800 million of them in the next 2 generations. There are studies. 800 million are going to be gone. The other 200 million vehicles will be electric. They'll be fuel cell. They'll be 3D printed with composite recycled material. We already have whole cars being put together with recycled material. And they will be autonomous within the next 5 to 8 years across the system. Very low marginal cost for logistics, heading toward near zero, but never zero. By the way, transport is number 3 cause of climate change. Number 1 is buildings, but we're going to retrofit them and turn them into nodes for this third industrial revolution. Anybody here know what the number 2 cause of climate change is from humanity, and we never talk about it? It's the real secret here. What's the number 2 cause of global warming emissions, Unito? Huh? Yeah, you want to say that a little louder?
Eating meat.
Beef. Beef production and consumption, even environmental leaders don't want to talk about it. But if we're not able to move down the food chain and begin to have a more equitable diet here, we're lost, because we're going to see that's going to be the big elephant in the room that's left. But let's go to transport. Does this mean the end of the transport industry? Not necessarily, but they have to change their business model. So I work with Daimler and Ford. They created the second industrial revolution, those 2 companies. So about 1.5 years ago, this is very cool, Wolfgang Bernhard asked me to come in, chairman of Daimler Trucks, and he said, we're going to bring in journalists from around the world. We're going to introduce them to the mobility internet. So I laid out the narrative. Then Wolfgang got up and he said, well, in the last 3 years, we have outfitted 300,000 Daimler trucks with sensors all over the outside of the trucks. They're big data centers, mobile big data centers. They're picking up traffic conditions, weather conditions, availability moment to moment in warehouses, and they're connecting that big data so anybody in the logistics chain, any business, anybody, can come up and they'll work with them and provide the analytics and big data so you can get your cargo from A to B with no deadheading at very low marginal cost, and then you share those gains with performance contracting, et cetera, with Daimler. Then they went up to a helicopter feed live on the German expressways, and we're all waving at the three drivers in the trucks. And he said to them, take your hand off the wheel, take your feet off the pedal, and they then put their computer on the screen. They became software analysts. They were retrained. Then the trucks autonomously came into a train, moving by themselves across the German expressway in real time. What I'm saying to you is all of this is now in practice. And how do we put it into place in the developing world and the developed world? The same way. The first and second industrial revolution infrastructure came in centralized, so you needed national governments to become the procurers, the curators. The third industrial revolution comes in distributed, region to region, city to city, province to province. The national government needs to be a facilitator, an incentive. They need to provide the regulations and standards, but each region, usually with a big metropolitan area, has to lay out this architecture I'm talking about and customize it to your region. And this can be done without a huge amount of government funding. This can be done through performance contracts. There's so much money out there available for infrastructure in performance contracts, it's there. This can be done by green bonds. And the interesting thing is once you start laying out this infrastructure in your region, the poorest regions, you create jobs day one. Lots of jobs. In northern industrial France, we have thousands of grandchildren of miners who have been trained in 9 months to retrofit buildings. Robots and AI will not lay down underground 5G cable. They're not going to dig the underground cable. Robots and AI are not going to put together and assemble wind turbines out in the fields. They're not going to be able to transform all of the buildings that we need. So we're talking about involving virtually every industry in this build-out. So if you're in a developing country, your emerging companies, whether they're ICT, transport, logistics, construction, consumer electronics, power and utility, they're all involved in the infrastructure. And it means lots of jobs. Last thought. I have to tell you, I was here with UNIDO, with Conde and Kella, when was it? At your big meeting every 2 years. Is it about 5 years ago? Not enough has happened, I'm going to tell you. We're now 5 years later. There are things happening, but not enough. We now can see in rural India, small micro startups are moving across rural India and sub-Saharan Africa. These millennials are great, these young businesses. They're putting solar panels on the roofs in the villages. One solar panel, one cell phone. Solar panel gives you light. The cell phone is powered. You don't have to walk 2 weeks to get electricity. You send $1 to the credit union every couple of weeks. It's cheaper than the kerosene that's killing you, and you keep the power up. And then they're connecting wires across 200 huts in a village for $2,500 and putting in storage, and then connecting microgrids across rural areas. What fascinated me, it's not really amusing, but when all the power went out in India a few years ago, 800 million people, no power, those rural areas, they were all powered. They were distributed. They were running their churning milk machines, and they had their electricity and lights. It was very interesting anecdotally. None of them lost power. This is power to the people. Power should be distributed so everybody has control over their power and shares surpluses or lulls with each other. So for the developing countries, you need to move your universities and your schools, high schools. These are digital natives. These kids are all digital natives. So they already have the technology. They're very sophisticated. But you have to provide this story, this narrative, and you have to mobilize your regions like we've done in Europe. We bring together in these 3 regions, we are test regions, which you should visit. Talk is cheap. See what they've done. So if you go to Haute-France or Rotterdam to The Hague or Luxembourg, go to Haute-France, you will see hundreds of high schools involved and universities. And when they built out their roadmaps, they did it. We just came in, provided technical help. They put together thousands of people in Haute-France, hundreds and hundreds on committees. We spent 10 months with them. They developed these massive roadmaps of how they were going to create a construction site there for 30 years, over 2 generations, so that their grandchildren would have both a sustainable society and an ecological way of life. They did it.
3 minutes, Mr.
Rifkin, in the working
please.
class. I'm going to finish. So in finishing, let me say this. I don't want to come back in 4 or 5 years. It's really important that what you've started here in places like rural India, sub-Saharan Africa, around the developing world, It's time now to ratchet it up and go from pilots to scale. From pilots to scale, so your whole infrastructure is in. And then I believe it's possible the developing countries become, if you will, the green light and the lighthouse for the third industrial revolution. They're going to leapfrog in and create a completely new era of history so we can have distributed power across the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Rifkin. I think we had an inspiring kick-off for this discussion. Mr. Rifkin, may I ask you to take place in the panel, and at the same time, let me now introduce the other 5 panelists and invite them to the podium one by one. Mr. Mohammed Ali Al Hakim, he's the Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of UNESCO, the UN Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. Mr. Al Hakim brings to his position deep knowledge of the governmental landscape in the Arab region, coupled with strong networks across this region. Mr. Al Hakim. Ms. Rachel Kite, CEO and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All. As Special Representative, she is the point person in the UN for action towards the agreed global goal on sustainable energy. Hi. Mr. Scott Foster, Director for Energy at UNEC, the UN Economic Commission for Europe. Mr. Foster is an expert on energy market design, including analysis and assessment of the major driving forces shaping demand, supply and price. Mrs. Megan Richard, you just made it. You just arrived, your flight just arrived. Director of Energy Policy at the Directorate General for Energy of the European Commission since the 1st of April 2017. She has experience working for the UN in Africa, for the Inter-American Development Bank, the Government of Canada, and for a couple of private law firms. Welcome, Mrs. Richards. Mr. Lamberto de Prai. He is head of Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia and Australia at Enel Green Power Group. Lamberto has been working in the Enel Group since 1991, being involved in several sectors related to power generation business, both in the conventional and renewable fields. Welcome. Now we have all settled. Allow me, Mr. Al Hakim, to start with you. Within UNESCO, you have a lot of working experience within the Arab region. How is the Arab region moving towards energy system transformation? And coupled to that, what are the challenges and opportunities for building sustainable and resilient societies in this region? Mr. Al Hakim.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Really, what an inspiring speech, Mr. Rifkin. I think you set up, my answer very good, because now we are in the developing world, which is the Arab region. And the Arab region is actually originally has a lot of oil and gas as well, as you know, so historically. So we are part of this challenge of transforming this energy into a new form. The problem with my region is really the challenges are immense. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of conflict. It's a lot of youth. Governments tend to be more central governments, tend to make decisions at central points. So infrastructure is not really very sophisticated infrastructure. It's an old second-generation infrastructure as well. So transforming that into the next level to execute SDG 7, which is really how do we do that. I think there are a lot of a tremendous number of challenges ahead of us. One of them is the infrastructure. And Mr. Rifkin said developing world have really a better position because they don't have to spend a lot of money to go to the new infrastructure regime, which I think it is actually absolutely right, because not only the region has blessed with the number of sunny days per year, as well as the flatness of the terrains. I think it is positioned to the third and fourth generations industry better than any other places. Also, there is one thing that Mr. Rifkin has talked about is the education. We are heading actually, there are 600 universities in the Arab world. 70% of them started after 1990. They are new. And most of them, they teach science and technology. And this is really an issue where the Arab world is going. And this is really where you could see where science and technology for the new generations are going and the emphasis on that. So that is one challenge, is how do we move into the new infrastructure regime so we could actually do the transformation of this energy smoothly. The second challenge, which is quite amazing, and the number that Mr. Rifkin is saying, is that there are a lot of money being invested, but financing going forward is a big challenge for us, because the big establishment in the Arab region are the government who are selling oil and gas, and therefore who is going to finance the new transformation of this energy going forward? So where do we get this money from? And this is really an issue that we are facing in my region. The third challenge which I see is the human resources. How do we develop these human resources to adapt to the new transformation of this energy? How do we do that? I mean, there's really no magic solution in that. Either you bring in experts from outside, or you actually have a hybrid of people from inside the Arab region, as well as the people from the outside. The fourth item, which I think it is important, and I don't know how this is going to happen magically. I was wondering whether Mr. Rifkin could tell us, because I think this is important, is how do we create the private sector in my region? Where is these companies are coming from? Who is going to actually take the lead? If we depend on the government in my region, it's going to be extremely slow, and the transformation would not be happening as fast as we think it's going to happen. So I think the next really big revolution probably in the region that I live in is the development of a small SMEs, I mean small and medium enterprises that actually could deal with the transformation system. I think this is really the points that are heading for us. A couple of issues that we are dealing with where you put economics, social, and politics. And this is where the Arab region is. There is political conflicts. You got Syria, you got Yemen, you got Libya, you got anti-terrorism, you got issues that relate to refugees and others. These are all social issues. And then also you have the gap between the who has and who has not. And this is a big gap in the Arab region. SDG 10 is about shrinking the gap and equality. How do we do this? How do we have inequalities being shrinked within the countries themselves as well as within the Arab region? So there's really diverse, per GDP in the Arab region. The Gulf, the GCCs are very high. You get another. We have also in the Arab region LDCs like Yemen, Mauritania, Sudan, and others. So really the gap is very big. Within the same country as well, we got a big challenge. The things that we have not succeeded in the past 20 years in my region is to create incentives for job and employment. How do we do that? We never really knew how to do it. Always government tends to run the business. Government to be, has all of the budgets and has all of the issues that's been sort of initiated. However, we are seeing a very nice glimpse of a new generation of government employees, or I call them bureaucracies. Take the United Arab Emirates. The United Arab Emirates is really a very great example of how the transformation of energy into renewable energy, into clean energy, and to access of that energy. That is a very good. Also, Saudi Arabia has a fantastic experiment, and they are moving forward with the clean energy. Morocco is a good example, again, of spending money that is coming out from donors to put an excellent plan for a transformation. So the challenges are there. The question is that how do we make this nexus, which is, I really don't want to talk about energy alone without talking about food and without talking about water. If you don't combine them together and you have the full nexus, then this is where the Arab region is going. Today, I think in the next 20 years, is not the issue of excess of oil, but it's really the lack of water that we are going to have in our region. And that's where we're really going to be how do we consume that? What do we do with this? With the temperature is going up, as well as with the loss of water that we have. So water, food security, as well as a transformation of energy into renewable, into a green economy, into this is really a mindset in the Arab region, extremely challenging, very challenging for us. We need to develop the new generation to understand that they are all connected, they are not separated, and therefore I think if we leave the conflict alone and leave the political process alone on the side, and we look at the economy of things, whether it's the internet things, the digital transformation, digital economy, digital energy, this is where we really need to focus, and that's the biggest challenge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Al Hakim. Let me turn to Ms. Rachel Kite. 2 weeks ago, you were at the center of the SDG 7 discussion when you and your team organized an excellent SE for All forum in Lisbon, attracting more than 900 participants. And at the forum, an update was also given on the global tracking framework. And Ms. Kite, in your estimation, where do we stand in terms of progress towards achieving SDG 7? And how does the pursuit of SDG 7 enable sustainable growth and the achievement of the other SDGs?
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with colleagues from UNIDO and the rest of the UN system. I think what happened in Lisbon feels like a long time ago, but I think it was just like 10 days ago, was the bringing together of the finance, the businesses, the communities, the ministers, the civil servants, that alchemy that is needed to turn, the big ideas into, policies that need to be changed, investments that need to be made, companies that need to succeed, communities that need to be able to switch something on and have electrons flow through the system, or be able to have access to clean fuels. And I think the diversity was extraordinary. We had 900 people from 100 countries. There were businesses, there were deals being done on the floor of the plenary, as it were. And we had special curated sessions in response to requests from countries who know where they want to go. And the question is, how do we get there? So, if you are a country that has decided that within the context of the decade on sustainable energy for all, within the context of the SDGs, within the context of the Paris Agreement, you want to halve the number of people who don't have access to clean fuels, and you want to do it, and you want to do that in 6 years, what's available to you? I mean, it's all very well and good for us to sit here in Vienna or in the UN in New York or at the World Bank spring meetings or whatever, but what's actually tangibly on offer to you? Who's doing business in your jurisdiction? Whose example could you learn from? And what would you learn from them if you were to study what they did? So something very powerful happened, but I think that the takeaway is, and the data custodians for SDG 7 presented the SDG 7 report at the opening of the forum, is that there is progress. So it's not that we're not making progress. It's just that we are woefully off the pace that we need to be at, and we have not achieved scale for the most part in most parts of the world. And so the question is, how do you take all of these points of light, as it were, and turn that into a revolutionary response to the scale that Jeremy was referring to? And I think this is where it starts to get very interesting if you are prepared to be led by the data and the evidence, rather than just sort of having theoretical conversations about renewable energy being able to answer all your prayers. So by the data and the evidence, energy efficiency, right, which is staring us right in the face, this is not something for which we need some kind of technological solution that hasn't arrived yet. This, we know a lot about how to do it, and there are examples of markets and countries that have done very well over the last 20 to 30 years in energy efficiency. We are way, way off track, and every year that we are off track, we make the job harder for us. So we need to now not be doubling the rate of improvement of energy efficiency. We're close to needing to triple it. And in some countries, the improvement has to be at the rate of 6 times over the next few years. Now, can that be done? So then you go back and you look and you see that there are indeed countries that are moving extremely fast, some from a very low base, some from quite an elevated base. So the question isn't, oh, goodness me, how do we do this? The question is, how do we all become a little bit more like Denmark up until a couple of years ago? How do we all become a little bit more like the rate of improvement that's being achieved in parts of the Indian economy, for example, or in parts of the Chinese economy? The same in energy access. The question not is what are we going to do about the just under 1 billion people who still don't have access to energy? The question is, how could we all progress at the rate of Kenya over the last 7 years? And so it becomes a much more tangible problem. So we have to understand, what did the Kenyans do? What has Bangladesh done? What is Rwanda now doing? What is Ethiopia beginning to do? How has Togo moved forward the kind of policy reform? The minister from Uganda is here. What is he doing? And then how do you replicate that? How do you build that kind of alchemy in other countries? And the same for renewable energy. Morocco is blessed with an extraordinary renewable energy resource, but is it possible for other countries to replicate the way in which that policy framework was built, the policy and political environment and support built, the finance coming into the country, the domestic finance that was applied, and then what would it take for everybody to become Morocco? So I think that that's where we need to focus the debate. Jeremy's saying nothing's happened in 5 years. That's hyperbole, he's right to a point, but I think we now have a number of examples of countries beginning to do a lot of the right things and being rewarded in the markets and in the financial markets for that, attracting investment. And so the question is, how do we move forward? I just want to make 2 points. When we look very carefully at finance within Sustainable Energy for All, responding to the requests we get from across the UN system, across member states and other stakeholders, the request is, could you please diagnose what is going on in the financial system? Because people say there's all this money coming in, we don't see any of it. And I think that there are 2 things. One is we're still doing stupid things. There's still an awful lot of fossil fuel subsidy being applied, including in the G7. I'm going to a G7 meeting later this week, including across the OECD, and then across developing countries. We have no hope of moving the kinds of transition forward at the pace with which we need to move it forward if we are not prepared to manage away the subsidy to the wrong side of history and manage those resources onto the right side of history. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars just within the G7 and within the EU alone. So we extrapolate that out to OECD and to the rest of the world, we're talking about more than, around about $500 billion. I don't think we can waste that. And every one of those subsidies put on the right side of history makes it easier for government policymakers to take the brave action that is needed now and not in the future. And then when it comes to the financing for energy efficiency, we haven't seen the kind of innovation that we have in renewable energy. So there is room for innovation in energy efficiency finance, and I think that that's something that we will be bringing a number of financial actors together around. And then finally, for energy access, there were enormous pledges made in 2015 in the run-up to the Paris Climate Accord. There were significant pledges made around the SDGs. And there continue to be, very generous commitments from development assistance on issues of access. But if you look at where energy access is of critical need, we're talking about 20 markets in the world accounting for 80% of the lack of access when it comes to energy. And if you look at where the money is going, the money is not flowing to those 20 countries. It's flowing to some of them, but for some not. And that's both a problem on the supply side, that maybe those aren't the countries that people want to engage with, but it's also a problem on the demand side, because if you don't have a good investment climate, if you haven't set up the markets to allow domestic investment and international investment into the decentralized electricity sector, if you haven't opened up markets so you can have distribution and consumer finance available for access to affordable clean fuels for cooking, then it doesn't matter what the development finance is doing. It's not necessarily going to have the impact that you want it to have. So I think by looking at the evidence and by looking at the data, we can actually start to break down this big problem of why aren't we moving faster on SDG 7 into bite-sized problems that we can solve together in partnership, country by country, issue by issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Foster, UNEC is the Regional Economic Commission for Europe, and UNEC has recently endorsed the so-called Framework Guidelines for Energy Efficiency Standards in Buildings. Well, that's a mouthful. Can you tell us what these guidelines entail and how this program will be implemented? Mr. Foster.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Since we are a UN body, we had to come up with a long name for this endeavor. Before I get into my formal remarks, I would like to endorse very substantially what Professor Rifkin has said. I'm reminded actually of a story my father used to tell me when he was a young man in Alabama. At the turn of the last century, they did not have running water or electricity in their home, which kind of is a shock when you think about it. Imagine your own lives without that. Wind that tape forward just one generation to my own children, sitting on the couch playing with their video games and texting their friends, certainly not doing their chores. Let's call that progress. There is opportunity, and if we can make that kind of change in one generation, these objectives actually are achievable, but we've got to get our minds set to it. On the other hand, there was a slightly negative image that popped into my mind as I was listening to your comments. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie WALL-E, where the humankind is out in space waiting for planet A to recover from its stupidities, and in the meantime being very much a prisoner of the technologies that they'd created. Now, with all that in mind, our objective at UNEC, what we're really trying to work on in the Sustainable Energy Division, is to move the dial on energy for sustainable development. If over the last 5 years we've not seen sufficient progress, let's get on with it. Let's start doing some real things. So we did promulgate these framework guidelines for energy efficiency standards in buildings. I invite you to go to our website to read them. They're 3 pages long, so that's not going to cause you a lot of time and angst. The first page is all about the context. The second page are the principles themselves, which is all about being strategic on how you deal with buildings, how do you monitor, how do you develop, etc. And the third one is the whole deployment process. As we've heard, buildings are a hugely important challenge that we must face. If in the next years we're going to have 9 billion people on this planet with 70% living in cities, we've got to get the building equation right. That's the equivalent of adding 235 cities the size of Greater Paris to the planet. That's an enormous challenge. We have to act now. We have to act at scale. So we've been able to mobilize a community to work with us because we are a UN platform and we're going to be able to move things forward. And we have to be bold and we have to innovate. Think about a 4-circle Venn diagram. The upper left circle is all about construction of the buildings. So you've got your building materials, you've got your building design, and you've got ultra-perfect building construction techniques. And if you can get that right, you can drive the energy requirements of buildings down to a very low level. There's a group, the passive house industry, believes that you can drive those numbers down to about 15 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. And I would challenge you to go back, do your own calculations at home and see how you compare with that number. That's for heating and cooling in the living space of your home. If you then add retrofitting, that number bumps up to 25. If you then add in water heating and you add in plug-in loads, you migrate up to higher numbers, the highest number being around 90. And I'm embarrassed to say that I don't meet that standard, and I'm supposed to be running a sustainable energy program. So that's the first upper left. The upper right is then all of the systems, the heating, ventilating, air conditioning systems, and all of the equipment being used in their home. If we can get that done right, given what we've done in terms of the building construction and design, we've made a lot of progress. Then go to the bottom left part of the Venn diagram, and you're looking at where's that energy coming from? Is it rooftop solar? Is it somehow a wind farm nearby? Do you have storage on site? It's this whole building as a source of energy instead of just being an energy consumer, a prosumer. And then finally, ICT, information and communications technology. We're actually saying the same thing using slightly different vocabulary. But if we can get all four of those communities working seamlessly together and we hit that sweet spot, we can make extraordinary progress very rapidly. And we're not dealing with standards for windows and standards for lighting and standards for insulation. We're dealing with a building as a complex system in its own right. And it's embedded in a community, which is more complex, inside of a city, inside of a national system. So suddenly you start bringing in mobility and communication and energy requirements in an interconnected system. So this is the kind of activity that we believe in the next 5 years will be able to significantly move the dial. Now, how are we going to do that, which was the question you asked? We're putting together three legs, if you will, to this program. The first is a gathering of international centers of excellence, largely cities-based, that's going to interface with the professional communities of contractors and architects and local city planners to get them to understand what's possible, what can be done. So it's New York City, it's Wexford in Ireland, it's Vancouver in Canada, it's going to be Astana in Kazakhstan. It's going to be a global string of pearls of these international centers of excellence. The second strand of this is an international consortium of universities. And they're going to be looking a lot into the research side, both in terms of design and in building materials. We're going back to Penn State University in Pennsylvania at the end of May. But it's going to include universities from Singapore, from China, from other places around the world. One of the things they've noted is even the curricula of architectural and engineering design schools don't capture what's possible. They've stayed with what's classical and what they've always done because that's how they've always done it. The third leg then is to go out and prove your point. Let's go out and do one after another of an example of how this works and create a library, a global library that people can look at. What you need as a standard in Moscow is not what you need as a standard in San Diego or Johannesburg or Beirut. Every locality is going to have its own climate, its own regulation, its own cultural background. But these principles apply equally well at a global level. So we're trying to mobilize a movement. And when we're able to influence the global supply chain that's delivering buildings to the world, then we will say that we've actually had the effect that we've desired. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foster, for this very practical example. Let me move to Mrs. Megan Richard. The European Commission is a large and influential player, and different DGs, like DG Energy, DG DEFCO, each with their own mandate, are giving shape to questions related to energy transformation. Ms. Richard, as a leader within DG Energy, what progress has been made on the EU Energy Union strategy? And coupled to that, what's the current status of the EU Clean Energy legislative package? Please.
There it is. So thank you very much for asking me. That's a very boring question to ask. So I won't bore you too much with the details in answering. I will go off-piste a little bit. So the Energy Union is one of the 10 big objectives of the Juncker Commission. Mr. Juncker is the president of the European Commission currently. And this, hand in hand with, I think, the digital single market objective, brings together many of the things that Mr. Rifkin mentioned in his very interesting introductory presentation, because the Energy Union is intended to make sure that Europe has security of supply. Many of you probably know Europe is a very big importer of energy, and in some countries in Europe, 100% of their imports come from a single source. This is creating some problems, as you can imagine. To make sure that there is an adequate, robust internal market for energy, to make sure that energy moves across borders adequately, that the market is operating properly, to improve the decarbonization and improve renewables, and of course, energy efficiency. So I was very pleased that Ms. Kite, mentioned the importance of energy efficiency, because this is something that is really primary in driving forward the energy policy in Europe. And then, of course, research, technology, innovation, and competitiveness. That's the last dimension of the Energy Union objective. So those are the 5 principles that underlie this objective. And then we have a number of legislative acts which underlie this and push forward on this. One relates to security of supply, another to intergovernmental agreements, an amendment to the gas directive. Those you probably don't want to hear all about, but the most important and the biggest package was adopted by the Commission in November 2016. It's called the Clean Energy Package. And this is to push forward all these elements of the Energy Union, but most importantly, is to make sure that we also strive to attain our Paris Climate Agreement goals and to push forward on these areas. So this package, as I said, of 8 legislative acts includes 2 on energy efficiency. One follows directly in line with what Mr. Foster was talking about in terms of energy efficiency of buildings, and that has been finalized by the European Parliament and Council. I won't go into all the details of European legislative finalization, let's call it, or making. It's like sausages and legislation. You don't want to watch it done. It works, though, eventually. So energy performance of buildings directive has been finalized. There's another one on energy efficiency in general, driving forward and making sure we have a highly ambitious objective for energy efficiency targets. And those targets are related to the 2030 objectives for Europe. Another one on renewable energy, which is also under discussion now between the Parliament and Council, and one on governance, which is to bring the whole package together to encourage each member state to establish national energy and climate plans, so bringing together energy and climate objectives, making sure that investors have a clear view of where each of the member states is going in its direction, because each member state in the European Union has the right to have its own energy mix. But of course, we're pushing forward these renewable and energy efficiency targets. And then there's a package on what we call the market design package of legislation, 4 legislative acts, which are intended to ensure that the integration of renewables into the electricity market is better, that the electricity market works in a more market-based design. And this is all part of the regulatory framework. Now, in the context of UNIDO and in the context of developing countries too, I think it's important to recall another thing, and this is the regulatory framework, and Ms. Kite spoke about this as well, policy framework, the regulatory framework. One thing that we do very much in our relations with developing countries and with all other countries, not just developing countries, is to try to ensure regulatory approximation, make sure that energy markets everywhere are more flexible, more manageable, more equitable, better adapted for renewables. For example, in China, we have a big initiative to discuss with the Chinese authorities how their regulatory framework could be improved for the integration of renewables to make it more efficient. We do the same in Algeria, Morocco. In Africa as a whole, we have a very active initiative, also including European industry, which is very active in the renewable sector, a global leader in renewables. Mr. Rifkin mentioned this already, to make sure that the market conditions and the policy framework is set to ensure that the integration of renewables, energy efficiency principles can be established. So this goes on in many other areas. And then one area I want to mention specifically is what we call the energy community. The European Union has a treaty agreement with the energy community, and the energy community is the 6 Western Balkan countries, plus Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. And those countries agree to adopt and integrate European energy and climate legislation to their own legislative provisions. So they effectively take the European energy legislation and adapt it to theirs. Now, one other important aspect about the energy initiatives in Europe is that they are intended also to drive forward growth, economic growth, and the development of jobs. There are 1 million jobs in renewable energy in Europe. There are only 250,000 in coal, and those in coal are 90% in mining. I have a personal story to tell Mr. Foster as well. My grandfather died in a coal mine, so I have a particular interest in making sure that people who work in coal mines don't have to work in coal mines so much longer, and that they find other alternative sources of employment. And as part of this legislative package that I mentioned, the Clean Energy for All Europeans package, we have 3 non-legislative initiatives as well. One on coal regions in transition, because there are a number of, I think, 11 regions in Europe that are still mining in coal, using coal very actively, but their families and the workers also need to find alternative sources of work, so that's one. The other is on energy poverty, which, believe it or not, is still a big problem in Europe. Europe has 8% of, on average, families that cannot meet their energy requirements. The OECD average is 4%, and in one European country, it's 50%. And then the last is on clean energy for islands. So that's just a quick overview of everything we're doing, and I'll go into more detail later when we have more time.
Okay, thank you so much. This was a very nice off-piste tour you made, indeed. Let me quickly go to Mr. Lamberto there. You are leading, Lamberto, the Sub-Sahara Africa, Asia and Australia team at Enel Green Power. What's the role of corporate organizations like Enel to support an effective transformation of energy? And maybe you can even give an example. Umberto.
Thank you. Good day to everybody. Well, our job is primarily to provide electricity to people, to industries, and we do this through investments. So our main job is to build power plants, run the power plants, and provide the electricity. To do all this, you need what we call an enabling environment. And wherever you find such enabling environment, we are ready and eager to invest. This is what we can do, but there's also what we can expect from organizations like the one here, like UNIDA, for instance, the help in setting up enabling environment. Technical barriers have been always overcome sooner or later. What has been proven to be a bit more difficult were the regulatory and policy barriers, because there's always the need of regulation in order to have deployment of new technologies. If we look what happened in the last 10 years in the renewable fields, but we see that the evolution of the technology has been accompanied by proper policy measures. And these policy measures were different from size to size and changed during time along with the evolution of the technology. Mrs. Kite told us a good example of a country in which this thing took place time ago. I would add another couple of examples in the African continent, which are quite easy because you can spot the corners of the continent. One is Morocco, as you mentioned, the other one is Egypt, and the other one is South Africa. Those countries have today, or can boast today, a significant portion of their generation park green because they have been providing with some regulatory or policy measures in the past. They followed several ways. They've done it in their own way. But the final result is that today they have power plants. Other countries are following today the example, and this is of paramount importance to have investments over there if this is allowed. Another thing, we don't know where the technology is going. Now we are living in a quite strange world. In the last 10 years, we have seen a green revolution, a completely green revolution. Nobody would expect the green revolution 10 years ago. Probably we would have been taken by lunatics if to have a meeting like this today. So we don't know where we are going in the future to this regard. But just may give a couple of examples. If you have, for instance, let's take the storage technology. Today, everybody's speaking about storage technology. Well, the storage technology is something which has been invented, let me say, 100 years ago. There's nothing really new or innovative. But just the fact of having this technology in a cheap way, in a cheap form, affordable for everybody, is already changing the way we are producing and delivering the electricity. And we have a huge impact in what we call the energy markets. So I can only guess what could happen with the digital revolution that we are facing and we are going to face. This will take, we are ready to capture the opportunities, to deploy, and sometimes also to help the deployment of new technologies. We have done it in the past, we will do it in the future. But this will depend again from the adoption of proper regulatory measurements, because there are things that today you cannot do and things that nations could, allow to do. And we are not speaking of only developing nations, we are speaking of nations as a general terms. Another thing I will not forget to mention is that usually we like speaking about small things. You know, let's take once again Africa. Africa is a place in which half of its population do not have proper access to electricity. And you think about Africa, it's small generation systems, small renewable generation systems, small distribution systems. Everything is small, tiny, and it gives the impression of something very, very nice in faraway villages. That's good, but that's only half of the story. The other half of the story is that half of the continent in a decade from now will be half urbanized. And you have a huge cluster of people all packed in towns, and you have to provide them electricity. Today, the rate is 40%. You have megacities all over the continent. And the only way we have to provide and to make these people access to electricity today is using the old good systems, which, by the way, are the large-scale renewable power plants that, by the way, they are not so old. They started 5-10 years ago. So that's the way we hope to cope with the changing world.
Thank you so much. Mr. Rifkin, let me turn to you. Having listened to these introductions of the panel members, how do you see that nations, regions, begin to move forward in their plight towards energy system transformation?
I think
I ask you to keep it brief.
Yeah, I think everything that's been set up here, I agree with one exception I may not be able to get into, but the key here is scale. We have, as some of you know, I've been working with Maroš Šefčovič since the Juncker Commission came in. He's in charge of the Energy Union, Smart Europe, and co-chairs Global Covenant Cities with Mayor Bloomberg. I think what we've noticed is everyone's trying with pilots. And all 7,000 cities can show you their hydrogen buses, they can show you their electric bicycles, they can show you your apps for getting around, and nothing's changing in any significant way because they don't have the narrative. It's the infrastructure that has to be put in to digitalize communication, energy, mobility, and the Internet of Things on urban areas and rural areas everywhere. Without that infrastructure, we're going to end up with pilot projects until it's all dead in the water. Now, then the key is scale, very quickly. what we've learned in many years now in the EU is we have to scale at the region level. National governments can provide codes, regulations, standards. They can provide help. The regions have to take this narrative, this architecture, and then customize it to their region. Communication, energy, mobility, Internet of Things, customize it to their region. So after a lot of trial and error, we have two major regions now, three really, that you can come and visit. So that's no longer just some pilots you'll see, which is Northern Industrial France, the largest industrial region in France, and Rotterdam to The Hague, which is the petrochemical complex of Europe. You need to come and see what's been done. And what's been done is we created a new form of governance where the governance of the regions become the facilitators but not the deciders. So you don't end up with ministries creating these little projects for their ministries. So what we've done in these regions is, you know, when we came in, we said, you have to bring together thousands of people. And the government is the facilitator. You set up the committees, bring in the business community all over the region, small, medium, and large, bring in the nonprofits, bring in the universities, the research institutes, and then maybe you have a core committee of several hundred people, and then we can get technical people to work with you, but you have to then take this architecture, you have expertise, and customize it to your region. It takes about 10 months of many, many people involved, not focus groups, not little stakeholder groups, but actual democratic assemblages. And here's the value. Once they own it, after a year, with hundreds of people involved in primary committees, thousands involved in the secondary committees, the universities, the high schools, there's no backlash. They're ready to scale. They're ready to take entire social housing districts or an entire commercial district or a rural area and say, let's scale it. Let's bring in companies and businesses and technical people to help us do it. If you don't scale it that way with this kind of democratic assemblage of deep participation, not focus groups, it won't work. Because the nature of the platform is distributed, open, transparent, it laterally scales. So everything that's been set up here, I essentially agree with. I will say that, that this is the only way I know that we can proceed and actually move this very quickly. Every region scales.
Thank you so much. We have another 10 more minutes, so I would like to ask the panelists for a very... You have to go because your flight is departing. Thank you, Mr. Rifkin, and a big applause for Mr. Rifkin. A quick second round, because we only have 10 minutes, so I ask the panelists to be very brief. Mr. Al Hakim, what role do you see for UNESCO in ensuring effective transformation of energy systems? Very briefly.
Yes, well, thank you very much. UNESCO is part of the UN system. Rachel actually spoke about the UN involvement in bringing together all of the nations to talk about their experience, their expertise. We have several forums. One forum is an Arab Forum for Sustainable Development, where we bring all of the Arab countries together. Also, we bring them to talk about water, climate change, transboundary issues that are really beyond the national interest. And I think this is really where the UN, I think multilateral diplomacy is important. And I think this is what we need to do, is we emphasize that it is really not about one subject. These SDGs are integrated. They are cross-border SDGs. And I was talking to the president of the Aiesec. There are 47 countries are applying to deliver their voluntary national review this year at Aiesec. 8 of them are from the Arab region, which is really fantastic. So we prepare them to sort of integrate these development and the SDG 17s. I think SDGs is all about the human rights. It's about social and economic justice. That's really the bottom line.
Thank you, Mr. Al Hakim. Let me quickly go to Ms. Kite. We are seeing 3 emerging trends in the energy sector: decarbonization, digitization, and decentralization, all as an enabler of the Paris Agreement. What does that mean to you, and how does it reduce the risks for the people that face the problem in the developing countries? Very briefly.
So the reality is that the decentralizing and digitalizing electricity systems or energy systems, which have to lead to a decarbonisation of the energy systems. When you put the 3 of them together, you're effectively democratising energy. And that's deeply exciting, and it's also deeply challenging. And I think that what we have to do is remember that there's somebody who has to make a decision on Monday morning. And what you're asking them to do is to leap into, quote unquote, an unknown. We have examples around the world of countries that are doing this. We're having examples of countries that are at the early stages of doing it and showing success. But you have to remember that on the other side is all of the lobbying, all of the pressure of the old system, including a lot of the finance. And so for a lot of the people who have to make a different decision on Monday morning than the one they would have had to make 2 years ago, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, the finance on offer is to do the wrong thing is cheaper. All of the institutions that are in existence domestically, internationally, grew up understanding what we used to have rather than what we need to have. And so there is an unpicking of the old system while the new system is put in place that is going on. So the responsibility of the UN system and the responsibility of multilateral development finance and other things that are collectively owned is to come in behind those people who have to make the decision and support them financially, politically, and with technical assistance to make the right decisions sooner. Because if they don't, they will, as Jeremy said, they will be the ones that suffer. And finally, this is not a developing country issue. The kinds of difficult policy dynamics that Megan is wrestling with will be the make or break of affordable energy for my family in the UK, will be the possibility of the European Union to be competitive in the future. And we don't have a monopoly on getting it right in the developed world. And deconstructing our old ways of thinking in order to embrace the possibility of the new technologies is going to be tough in the developed world, but it can be done. So this is truly a universal SDG, and the lessons are going to be flying south to north as well as north to south.
Thank you, Ms. Kite. Mr. Foster, fossil energy still represents 80% of today's energy mix. What approaches can be effective in reducing the environmental footprint of fossils?
Yes, thank you. That is the reality that's in place despite all of the progress that we've made to date. And if we're not prepared to deal with the issue of fossil, then we're probably not going to be able to get to our objective. I think recognizing how many livelihoods depend on fossil, how many lifestyles today depend on fossil, is a critical issue. If we want to near-term deal with the environmental footprint of fossil, we have to be prepared to discuss technologies such as carbon capture and storage, high-efficiency, low-emissions technology. We can't simply exclude them and think we're going to get to our objectives by dealing with one part of the energy equation. At some point, we have to be rational in our policy setting. That rationality has to be economics-based, so we're talking about subsidies, and not just fossil subsidies. We're also talking about end-use tariffs and how you structure subsidies for other energy sources. We have to talk about rational in terms of the environment. If we really believe that CO2 emissions are an issue, then we have to have a serious discussion about a price on carbon, whether a market or a tax. And then the social dimension of energy. We have got to expect that governments are working to enhance the quality of life of its citizens, and that's what underpins the whole 2030 agenda. So there needs to be some kind of a grassroots dialogue with the citizenry, engaging with the political processes so that these concepts are better understood. Now, one of my favorite topics is the idea that we need to reinvent energy. Energy as we know it today has delivered the world that we're living in, and it's been an engineering culture that delivers kilowatt hours and cubic meters of gas and tons of coal. We've heard it from Professor Rifkin, but to put it in different terms, we're not consuming energy right now. We're consuming lighting, heating, and mobility. So what has happened in telecommunications needs to happen in energy. I need to change my relationship with you. So I'm going to promise you 20 degrees in your home. You pay me a subscription service. It's then up to me with my cost of capital, with my understanding of the technology, and my relationship with the contractors to reduce my costs delivering the services that you demand, and you don't have to be a weekend plumber, or electrician. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Mrs. Richard, what is the international dimension of the EU energy strategy, and what's the EU doing in the clean energy transition beyond the EU shores?
Well, I mentioned the energy community, which is an important element. We have a big international strategy in energy. This is both bilateral and multilateral. We have energy dialogues with many big energy producers or energy consuming countries around the world, and these may be either developing countries or OECD countries. Depends on the nature of the country. We have them, just as an example, with the USA, with India, with China, and there are many others. And then, of course, the multilateral element is very important as well. We're very active in the G20, in the energy aspect, of course, the G7, but also we have something, and I think it's useful to mention it here in this context, the Clean Energy Ministerial, which will be taking place at the end of May, and this is sponsored this year by the Nordic countries and the European Commission, and this is a group that is driving forward better energy efficiency, better innovation, research and technology in this sector. And one aspect I want to mention as well, and this has international implications, is that our research and innovation program is open to the whole world. Many participants from developing countries can participate without cost, in the sense that they're eligible for financing. Many others are not eligible for financing, but it's still open for participation. And with the new multi-annual financial framework proposal that the Commission adopted last week, a big emphasis on that next program of funding is on research and innovation and on climate and energy improvements. So there's another area where we have potential to expand even further the work that we're doing and work even more with other partners.
Thank you, Ms. Richard. Mr. Lamberto, let me close with you. What are the new types of technologies that move forward this energy transformation? And does Enel, can you give an example on how Enel deals with these new technologies?
Oh, absolutely. But a new technology may be considered the green technologies that started 10 years ago, and we are not even finishing discovering the potential of such technologies. Imagine the photovoltaics, there a lot of job to be done there, a lot of work to be done then to take up the most in terms of efficiency. But there are also new technologies we are looking very keen to develop. For instance, the energy from the waves, the energy from the seas, or something that today is still in a cradle, let's say, environment. The other thing is, of course, the off-grid systems that must be developed. And I already mentioned the storage and the ensuing electric vehicle revolution, which, if you take millions of electric cars put together, you have a huge battery which is completely changing the way, again, you are producing and distributing electricity. So these are the technologies. Naturally, the deployment of this technology will depend on the policies and on the regulations that will be adopted. Hindering phenomenon must be overcome. We are pretty confident. You know, we are running today more than 1,200 green power plants in more than 30 countries, and each year we add one new country or two. So we are pretty confident that this regulation and the enabling environment I was mentioning before is taking place everywhere in the world, and you cannot stop it. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to close the lively panel discussion as follows. Coming July, we have the high-level political forum on SDG 7 review in New York. And this Vienna Energy Forum will work on an outcome document that will also serve as an input to the high-level political forum. In order to support the Vienna Energy Forum organizers, I'm going to ask the panelists in one sentence to come with a recommendation on achieving SDG 7 to this high-level political forum. Mr. Lamberto, can I start with you? One sentence.
Help us in providing enabling environment for investment.
Mrs. Richards?
Well, I would echo that. The regulatory framework is essential, but I think also working together is really important. Best exchange of practices, good practices, and regional work together.
Thank you. Mr. Foster?
Thank you. I would say accelerate activities that make sense even today, focus attention on effective pathways to the future, including relevant indicators and data capabilities.
Thank you. Mr. Al Hakim?
I think it's about integrated solution and new generation network.
Ms. Kite, can I end with you?
So from the top down, every country needs energy efficiency standards and regulations to cover the entire economy. In order to do that, you have to listen to business and communities because they're the ones who want to live with clean air. Those are the ones who want to be part of the dynamic cities that we talked about, and those are the ones who can see the technological applications today and tomorrow. But if you don't make economies energy efficient, whether you're a developing economy or a developed economy, we don't have the time or the space to do all the other things that we need to do in the transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that we had a very lively and inspiring discussion. I would like to thank the panelists, and I would like to ask you to give them a lot of applause.